Annie, welcome. Thank you for talking to us. This conversation will be available to listen to on the From the Mentor's Desk podcast. And Ian Stanley is my co-host. Thank you, Ian.
Of course.
Just to remind you and everyone, our goal, the people we're trying to help, early career or novice researchers who are looking to get their first major external grant to fund a research career. Okay. And so our goal is to help them avoid pitfalls, career pitfalls, grant writing pitfalls, and use best practices. So that's what we're trying to do here. So Annie, you are our special guest because you are a very important person and a very interesting person in the landscape of military medical research. So people will be able to link to your bio and read all about you, but we wanted just to talk with you about your own personal journey. Okay. Could you tell us what's your main scientific training and why you chose that?
I can. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a little intimidating on the other side of the desk. So I'm an epidemiologist by training, working in a clinical department, which is interesting in and of itself.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Will you explain what is epidemiology to the big world and what do you mean by that? Like what part of epidemiology?
Absolutely. So I think today when we see or say epidemiology, everybody's like, oh my God, you do infectious disease research, COVID. What did you think? I'm like, no, I don't do that. So by definition, epidemiology is looking at an outcome, so either an illness, an injury, something like that, that is at a statistically significantly higher level in a population than what is normal.
Huh. I've never heard that. You know what I was going to say it is? The study of the spread of disease. Isn't that I just learned something
about it.
But
when you think about it in a larger scope, it can be applied to so many other things. Mm-hmm. So there's injury epidemiology, there's chronic disease epidemiology, infectious epidemiology, there's maternal epidemiology, there's aging epidemiology. So it's really, I think it's a skill set and a set of methods that can be applied to really anything in behavioral health sciences, medical sciences, really anything where you have a population and there's something going wrong above and beyond what is a normal level.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you did turn to healthcare. Mm-hmm. So which I suppose must be part of epidemiology, whether it's any of those things. Mm-hmm. What in particular did you get interested in?
Sure. So I started by doing my master's in epidemiology, which is very broad. So you have to learn statistics, you have to learn epidemiological methods, behavioral health. There's a couple other core competencies for an accredited school of public health. And you don't really have to focus. You don't have to specialize within your field. So I was just a general epidemiologist. And I was able to work for, actually she then became my academic advisor at Katerina Rosano, and she ran a neuroepidemiology of aging lab. And so I got really interested in the application of epidemiology to neurological outcomes, injury, and diseases. And I paired that with my personal interest in traumatic brain injury. And so when I went back to school for my doctorate, I said, I'm going to look at TBI. I'm going to become this neuroepidemiologist that Katerina is. Which was fantastic. And so my early career was completely focused around traumatic brain injury epidemiology.
What was your personal interest? Why did you care about TBI?
Because I've had a few. So I had a lot of concussions.
You were a soccer player?
I was a very accident-prone child, to be completely frank, and then had a couple of random fluke sports accidents that led to multiple concussions. And when I was in college, my last concussion, I was not recovering. And I was pre-med at the time, and I had to drop all my labs because I couldn't figure out why I couldn't learn. And so I wanted to know what was wrong with me. Why was I different? Why was this one different than the last one? And so I just had that personal interest around, like, there's something wrong. There's something that is not being picked up by psychological exam. They were telling me I was normal. I was like, I'm not normal. My mother's been telling me that for years. But like,
darn it, we don't want to believe she is right.
So that kind of jumped me into researching traumatic brain injury.
Thank you for sharing that.
I learned something new about you because as we're talking about military medical research, of which you're a leader, I made an assumption that your interest came from studying TBI in a military population, given how prevalent it is as well.
Yeah, so I definitely crossed that bridge very early when I was still in grad school. And so, but initially my entree, if you will, into TBI research was in this neuroepidemiology aging lab. We looked at premature cognitive aging. So sickle cell disease actually causes premature cognitive decline, and you can see that in neuroimaging. So does type 1 diabetes. And I was trying to make the argument to Katerina at the time. I was like, I think TBI is accelerated aging. I really do.
Ooh,
and she thought that was like yeah, and it was right before kind of this cusp of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, if you're in the neuro world, like that becoming a thing. And when that came out, I looked at Katerina. I was like, I need to do this. And she's like, yeah, you need to do this. And so I applied and went back to school. And then, so I had an academic advisor within my home department and my school, and she didn't have the data I wanted. And obviously, as an epidemiologist, it's prohibitive to do your own prospective research because you need large data sets. And so I was fortunate enough that University of Pittsburgh was a member of one of the longest running epidemiological studies of traumatic brain injury in the country. And so back to our conversation, I cold called the local PI and I said, Amy, I want to use your data. This is what I do. I've read all about what you do, and I think we can work well together. Would you help me? Would you sponsor a GSR, a graduate student researcher position? And she said, yeah. And that was it. And she was DoD funded as well. And it was within a larger, it's called the Sapphire Center at University of Pittsburgh, and they're very heavily funded by the DoD. And so that was kind of my entree into DoD funding.
Wow.
That is fascinating. So at that time, you went to Pittsburgh? Okay. And you were doing TBI research. And yet I know you became a big executive in the DoD world. So how did you go from early days, your, TBI's accelerated aging, brilliant, to this being leapfrogged into being an administrative leader on the research side?
Great question. I'm going to jump back in time. So I was working for Katerina, managing her lab. I was her lab coordinator. And early on, when I started to go back to school, I was still working for her part-time. And I was realizing I love research. I'm very inquisitive by nature. We called it rabbit holing. I did too much of that, like way too much of that. But I also realized I want to make a bigger impact. So my school program, we had a PhD or a DrPH, which is just a doctorate of public health. And so to Ian's point earlier about the difference between a PsyD and a PhD, the DrPH is much more pragmatic. So you have to take public health law, you have to take a lot of public health management courses. And so I decided then that I wanted to pursue the DrPH and actually leave academia. So ultimately that was my goal. I didn't want to be the ivory tower, if you will. I wanted to be more pragmatic about what my research could do or how I could affect research and practice. And so part of that is you're required to do a fellowship. And so again, I identified someone and I got on my little email and
Well, wait a minute. You're bringing up this magical moment, but we got to tell people how you did it. Okay. When you identify this person, were you going to the literature, reading the papers, finding the most moving paper, like if I could do the thing, that's what I want to do, and then reach out to that author? Like how did you find the person to cold call?
So it was a center, and I knew I wanted to try and do a fellowship with that center if I could. And so it was through research online, Googling, if you will, as a verb. And so within the military, I knew at that point I wanted to ensure I stayed within the military population, because I do have a lot of friends and family members who were impacted by combat injuries. And so I was passionate about that, passionate about TBI. And at that time, it was called the Defense Veterans Brain Injury Center of Excellence. And so this was the DoD office that was responsible for all of the surveillance for traumatic brain injury. So that's the epidemiological piece. They helped to inform and conduct research on traumatic brain injury. And then they also put together clinical practice guidelines and clinical care protocols for the different their Intrepid Centers of Excellence, which are the DoD's TBI care centers. And so it was an all-in-one. It's now just become the TBI Center of Excellence. It's been renamed. And it was just, I was like, that's where I need to be, because they're doing policy, they're doing research, they're doing epidemiological surveillance, they're doing patient education. And so I found the director online, and then I couldn't find her email online because a lot of government employees don't put them online. So I then PubMeded her. And I found an article where she was a corresponding author.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. And I just emailed her out of the blue. And I was like, hey, it's going to be free labor. Can I do a fellowship for you for 6 months? And she's like, sure. And that was that. And I moved to DC.
Okay, lesson. Ask.
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 Can't hurt. What's the worst she could have said?
I just want to re-emphasize, Annie, that you've told us multiple things, that you did your homework, you found the right person, and then you reached out to them. And it occurs to me that you and I were interviewing somebody who used a little hook of a framework. What was it called?
You, me, we.
You, me, we. So you are doing this amazing stuff. I've done homework on you. Let me tell you a minute about myself. This is what I think we could do together. And that's a model, that's a pattern that I hear you using in those outreaches.
Yes. I never, looking back, would have thought I'd be a person to overcome. I'm very timid usually and shy. I'm very introverted. But I was quite brave, I think, when it came to my career, because I knew I wanted to do something. And so, I did those cold calls.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, thinking back, did you have then, you still have to bring us forward to being a research leader, an administrative research leader. But back then, did you have any key mentors that really pushed you forward in a way that advanced your career in the way you had wanted to envision it?
Definitely. I think that I like to think there's mentorship from all areas, right? And so I think that within my lab during my doctoral work, there was a postdoc there and another doctoral student who really helped me, because I knew I wanted to be outside of academia, and I was terrified to admit that to academia. And so the postdoc and the other doctoral student, shout out Shannon and Michelle, they just pushed me to, they're like, you know what you want to do, just go do it. Tell them that's not what you want. You don't want to do that path that everybody's doing. So I think that was really helpful from a peer mentorship. And then once I got to DivBic, they were so open and really just embraced having me there. And everybody was so eager to teach me. Actually, some of your colleagues, Brooke Morrissey-Heinz, was there and loved her. She completely introduced me to her realm, which I had no idea existed. And so that was fantastic. And then there was another individual, his name is Sean, and he actually basically helped set up the next step in my career as my fellowship was ending. And he's like, okay, you want to stay in the DoD realm? You want to do some research? It's going to affect policy later on. We're writing a study together, and then it'll fund you. And so he really pushed me to take that next step and to kind of figure out where I would go after my fellowship was over. So he was a great mentor.
Yeah, what a group. And we talk often about research, right? Being a team sport, team of mentors. But it also, I think of it as a team of, there's the scientists, there's people helping at all different levels. And you then transition from there to maybe not doing a lot of the direct science, but supporting research and facilitating and leading research in other ways. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So I did a brief research stint after DivVic. So I graduated, defended, and then prior to my defense, actually, I started working as an epidemiologist for the Uniformed Services University as a research epidemiologist. And I was working on subconcussive blast injury, which was super cool, going out to the field with the operators who were firing shoulder-mounted weapons, anti-tank weapons, and we had this whole portfolio around measuring the outcomes from their occupational exposure. Did that for a year, and then from my DivVic days, another person that I had worked with had moved on to what's called the Medical Research and Development Command, which manages all of the Defense Department's medical research funding. At that point, it was Army and the Defense Health Agency. Now everything is under Defense Health Agency. And she called me and she said, we've worked together. We've got an opening coming up on the sponsor side, so the funding sponsor side, as a program manager, portfolio manager. We want you to apply. And apply, since we're on video, I can do that. It was my job and I just had to submit my application. And that's how I got into more of the research portfolio building, kind of leading the strategic direction of what we want research to be moving forward. And so that's kind of how I find myself now in this more research management role, but it's from being on the funding sponsor side and understanding everything that comes with that.
I want to follow up because we're in time. We're still before you came to Colorado.
Yes.
But I want to, what I heard, Ian, from Annie's prior story was peer mentorship. It's not only Dr. Fabulous somewhere who's got a research center and I mean, we've talked to many highly established researchers. We talked to early career researchers, and so they always have, if you're so lucky to be in their space.
And I had those, but I wanted to emphasize.
There's something very special about peer mentorship, like literally, like I'm a graduate student, you're a graduate student, or what we might call step ahead mentor, like you called her the postdoc, you're a graduate student, because sometimes that's like more of a safe space and you can be more open. And it sounds like you were open with them. You said your truth, and for sure, there's a lot of peer pressure to they're here building people in a particular way to be that. And so they are the ones who really helped make you strong to say what you wanted.
Yes.
And then I heard that theme later when your mentor says, well, let's help you develop a job that you want. How could he help you if you didn't say what you really wanted? Right? So to me, that's some of the magic that happened in your career path was that you, as the mentee, were taking charge of your own career by saying what exactly you wanted.
I think in retrospect, yes. I would not have thought that's what I was doing at the time.
But I think we can hear it from a reflective moment.
Yeah, and that, I know we've had this conversation, the three of us, before, but mentorship comes from all different angles, left, right, up, down, and you can learn from people at all stages of their life, and 100%. I'm glad you had that experience.
I also think we haven't brought in your husband to this story, but I also think people in our lives can be mentors. Certainly, my husband is not an academic, and he's an engineer. It's like so I get and he's known me since we were teenagers, so he can be a real truth teller. I don't know what you're doing out there with academics, but this is how it would be for everybody else, that sort of thing. And because your spouse has military experience, probably, you can, just to build on what you were saying, Ian, accept input from all things, especially when you're making steps that do change your trajectory.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I think Ian highlighted this exceptionally well. But finding people who are more knowledgeable than you in areas that you're lacking and building that trusting relationship so that you can be vulnerable and just say, I have no idea what I'm doing and I need to understand this. And then just accepting their input. And so I'm very much, we chatted about this all 2 years ago, the team scientist, right? So definitely trying to pull in people from different directions because I like to think of epidemiologists typically take one of two routes. You either become an exceptional expert in your injury, your illness, your disease, or you are an expert in methods. But that's very small. It's a very narrow, myopic view of what you're doing. And so you have to build that team. You need the clinicians. You need if you're not in the methods, you need the methodologists. You need other people. And so I think I recognized that really early on, that I knew what I knew. And there's a lot I don't know. A lot I don't know.
Well, that theme has come up before in other conversations.
Yeah.
And, I often think, it's the sign of wisdom. Like, I think the longer you're in your field, the more you think, the less you think you know, the more you are aware that what you know is like this big. And it's like almost a sign of immaturity when you, like, I remember I have one of my younger brothers came home from college one day and, announced to me something nonsense that he knew everything about philosophy as it happens. One of my brothers was a philosophy major. And I was like, you haven't even had this class. You had like one class and you're sure you know it all.
Yeah.
And of course, that's how people are, right?
Yeah.
It's the reason, young students earlier in their training are like, they're sure they know. And then 4 years later, they're like, I don't know anything about this.
I think psychologists call it, if I can harken back to my studies, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know. And as a scientist, you have to show humility.
It's an unknown.
Yes.
I don't know.
I think the other thing that I'll add was kind of growing up in my career in the DoD, the manager that I worked for, my first job in the funding sponsor's office, she's an Air Force colonel, she's brilliant, she commanded the room. She said, don't ever say something that you're not sure is right, because it has very significant repercussions down the road. And it's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know, I will find out, and I will tell you. And so that is something that really stuck with me. And it's every time I had a new team member, when I took over the manager position, that's what I would tell them, right? Like, do not say something if you're not sure it's true. Tell them you'll tell them later. You'll get back to them. And so that I'm very comfortable saying I don't know. But I wasn't at that point. So it was just her constantly reminding me, you're actually DoD research is an acquisition. So you're responsible for money now. You're responsible for plans now. You can't be wrong.
That sounds scary.
It sounds scary. And I love that advice, because if you think of a novice researcher, especially if they're seeking out mentors or trying to prove themselves in the field, they might often come to the table necessarily appearing very confident, but there's also a lot of holes in people's knowledge, as they're developmentally appropriate holes in knowledge, and that advice to acknowledge those holes and say, I don't know. And that's actually why I need this mentorship team. Because they can also tell me what I don't know. It's really great.
It occurs to me, we had another conversation with somebody who brought up imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
And, in reflecting on this conversation, I wonder if some of that comes from the mistaken idea that you think you should know everything and fundamentally you don't. And so there's this tension, but the more experienced person knows you don't, doesn't expect you to, and is seasoned enough to know that that is actually true and factual and acceptable. But, maybe that's where some of that comes from. It occurs to me.
Yeah, very likely. And kind of the nature of science is asking questions, because we don't know. We don't always know.
Right.
But, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Annie. We're going to pause here and then we'll continue the conversation in another episode. Thank you.
Alrighty, thanks.